Hello. About 9 years ago, I gave up work in a conventional sense and went out into the garden to start growing as many of our own fruit and vegetables as I possibly could. And the plan was that would be my way of contributing to the family finances. We spent about 5.5 years in our previous home and then moved to this site almost 3 years ago. And this year, I'm really pleased to say that our veg garden is completely set up. It's growing lots of wonderful food, and hopefully by the end of 2024 we'll be back up to the levels of about 75 to 85% of everything on our plate coming from the land. And the main reason that we can eat so much of our own fruit and vegetables is because we've changed the way we eat. So we now eat seasonally. We eat food that's fresh from the garden, and then any surplus I'll store either in the freezer or by canning. The young fruit trees that were planted in this food forest in the autumn of 2021 are really growing well now and really taking shape. And although there may not be much fruit this year, it's really promising for harvests for years to come. The area of the food forest behind me here is mostly left for nature. So there are strips of lands that are uncultivated. They're full of wildflowers and grasses. So I've added lots of bushes and shrubs like currants and flowering plants, and there are fruit and nut trees all the way through. However, the veg garden is much more managed. And so in this video, I'm going to show you some of the strategies that I use to ensure that we get plenty of food all year round. I'm Zorab, and this is Byther Farm. The majority of the garden is laid out in 16 raised beds. Now I raise them because we're growing on a north-facing slope, so it allows me to have, say, 8 centimetres of wood on that side and 16 to 20 on that side, which means as I fill it with compost and soil, I can make a sort of a more level surface to grow on, which hopefully helps counteract some of the effects of being on a north-facing site. And the veg garden has the advantage of there not being a lot of trees close by, casting a lot of shadow, so it's quite an open space. However, it's almost too open, so I'm thinking about putting a low fence in just to reduce the impact of the wind coming across the site. So there are 16 beds. The central 4 are mostly flowers because I love them and because they attract pollinators, and it looks beautiful. And one of the really important things about creating a garden for me is that it looks beautiful and I really enjoy being in it, not just that it's highly productive. So the central 4 beds are mostly flowers but do have some edibles in them, whereas the other 12 beds are mostly edibles and some of those have flowers in them. You'll see what I mean as we go through a veg garden tour. Bed number 1 is roughly divided into 2. On this side, I have perennial onions. So these are a Welsh bunching onion. And in the central strip of the bed, I put in a few elephant garlic. They're probably going to stay there for a couple of years because they were smallish cloves that I put in. And we'll just wait and see how those go. And then on this side of the bed, it's more salad. So there are lettuces and beetroot. And there's also a salsify. And in case you're wondering what this is, it's a carrot left over from last year, and I'm just leaving it to go to seed. There are some forget-me-nots and some chives. The forget-me-nots will come out sooner or later, and I plan on putting a cosmos in there for this year. Bed number 2 has netting over it for a couple of reasons. But in here, I'm growing potatoes. This is my potato trial. Down the centre of the bed, I planted red and white cabbages, so it was a red acre and a white acre, and I've got to say the slugs have had an absolute field day on the white cabbages. Then just now moving over to the red, which is really disappointing, but I have grown some spare cabbages, and once they are a lot bigger I will transplant those in to fill any spaces that are left. We've got the netting on here is to protect the cabbages from cabbage white butterfly and moth, but it's also to protect the whole bed from cats using it for their lavatory. Bed number 3 is a real mixture of plants. So I've put in some leeks, and then interplanted with the leeks are some kale. This is a Cavolo Nero, or a black kale. And then over on the far side there is some chard and also some more beetroot. And then in this corner is a small sweet Sicily. It's a self-sown plant that was actually in bed number 4, but I've moved it to here so it can have this space. Bed number 4 still has some of the plants that were in here last year, so there's some Welsh bunching onions, some Egyptian walking onions and a few Babington leeks, which are a perennial leek. There's some sweet Sicily that's self-sown in here, and I've left some poppies that are also self-sown. But mostly this bed will have sweet corn in it. So I started the sweet corn seeds off inside with some heat and then hardened them off and planted them out about a week or so ago. So I'm really hoping that they will start growing well very soon. One of the first strategies I use is polycultures. So I very rarely grow just one plant in a bed at a time. And I also try to ensure successional growing, so that as one plant is going to be harvested, there's something else ready to come up through. This bed, you can see 3 stages in it. Here is the last of the brassicas that were in here last year. They've gone to flower, but I'm leaving them for pollinators. It's a really good source of nectar for them at this time of year. So they will get cut back before they go to seed because I don't need to collect the seeds from them. Growing up through them here is elephant garlic, and you can see that they've got their scapes on, so that's like a flower stalk. That can be snapped off. I will do this on all of them, and then these can be fried with some garlic and they're absolutely wonderful. Removing the scapes does a couple of things. It allows the plant to divert all its energy back into producing a bigger bulb, and it provides us with a second harvest from these plants. This elephant garlic will be out of this bed in a couple of months, and to keep the succession of food growing, to keep these beds working as hard as possible, I've already sown some parsnip seeds in rows between the elephant garlic. So I think I've got 6 rows of parsnips. I sowed the first 3 1 week, and then a couple of weeks later I sowed the next 3, and very soon I'll make sure I've got something in at that end as well. Although it may not be parsnips, I might sow some carrots. Help me keep track of everything I've sown and transplanted and then harvested. I keep a journal, and I've created one for myself, and it's available to you too, and it has space in it for making notes for when you've sown things or transplanted them or harvested them, and then I leave notes like, oh, this was great, grow more of it next year, or I didn't really like this, don't grow as much. I've included guides of when you can sow different veg, and quick growing veg, and also things like perennial veg. My vegetable garden planner and journal is available on my website bytherfarm.com, and it's also available on Amazon. Now, although in theory beds 5 and 6 are purely ornamental, that's not entirely true. Here I've got a very lovely bronze fennel. It's a perennial plant. It's a filler. It produces lots of these lovely aniseed flavour leaves. There's also some marjoram and some chives. So there are herbs in this bed. And likewise over here, there's plenty of parsley, and I've also planted an Asturian tree cabbage over on that side. So there are some edibles in here. Bed number 8 is also covered with netting, which gives you the clue that there are probably brassicas in there. And there are. So there's broad beans, which is fava beans, and they're growing nicely. They've got a lot of flowers on them, which I'm very excited about. This netting is a soft butterfly netting, so it allows pollinators, bees can get through, even quite large bumblebees can get through it, but the mesh is still fine enough that butterflies and moths can't get in there, helping to protect the brassicas. Of course, it's not protecting against slugs, of which we have plenty this year. However, this bed is another polyculture. It's got red and white cabbages in it, as well as the fava beans. Bed number 9 is one of those areas that I keep meaning to attend to, that I keep meaning to deal with, and I just haven't got around to it. So I need to take all the weeds out of it. There are stinging nettles and dock leaves, there's creeping buttercup, there are grasses, there's all sorts of things in here I don't want. But there's also strawberries that have been in for 3 years, and they will become unproductive very soon. So they're heaving with strawberries at the moment. I will let those grow and ripen, and I take a harvest from them. But I think that most gardeners have at least one area in their garden that they're less inclined to tackle, and that's usually the weediest area. And well, this is mine. Beds 10 and 11 are the other two that are mostly ornamental, although again they've still got some edibles in. So I've popped in some beetroot here, and there's also some ochre across here. This was parsley. It's now going to flower, and I'm really happy for those to flower. They're great for attracting pollinators, particularly things like lacewings to the garden. And when I take those out, I'll replace them with plants that I'm already growing in the polytunnel, just to keep the soil occupied, to keep plants in the ground so that all the soil life can interact with those roots all the time. Here in the polytunnel, where it's actually really warm now, are the plants that I'm growing on to grow into spaces. So I've got lots of squashes waiting to go out. There are tomatoes waiting to be planted in the polytunnel, and then, as I said, lots of plants that are ready in case I have gaps, in case the slugs eat everything. I have got some extras, and I've also sown the next lot of seeds. So these are beetroot, these are cylindra, and I sowed these yesterday. So in about another 3, maybe 4 weeks, they'll be ready to plant out, and then I can just keep on with that succession growing. On the tree behind me are some peaches. They aren't ready yet. I keep coming and just and testing. I think it's going to be another week or so before the first of those are ready. In that direction, I've got a bed of salad leaves. I've got some cucumbers growing at the end here, and along the far side of the polytunnel is where all my tomatoes will go. Bed 11 has fewer edibles in it, but it does have an Asturian tree cabbage. It's a short-lived perennial, and I've been growing them for about 8 years now. Not the same plant. They last about 2 to 3 years, and they offer a huge amount of food for the amount of space they take up in the ground. And bed number 12 has my bean structure in it. Now this is designed to cope with very high winds that we get on this site. And it's very solid, sturdy structure, which the canes are then strapped to, and the plants can grow up here. And the other thing I like about this is because the canes lean outwards from the bed, the beans then dangle down. It makes them really easy to harvest. The beans growing up these canes are Greek gigantes beans, and they're the ones that I grow for the bean inside the pod rather than the green pod itself. At the front of the bed, so that's the south side of the bed, there's chard and marjoram, and I've put in a couple of scarlet kale as well. Yet again, another polyculture. Bed 13 is very little. It's about 1/3 of the size of the rest of the beds, but I absolutely love it. So it's got a combination of agastache and thalictrum and monarda in it, and I'm growing those because I love their flowers. And down here at the back, there's some more chard, and then there's marjoram and chives and lavender at the front. There are a few more spaces in here, so I might pop in some celeriac, some celery, or even a brassica in the front there, and anywhere else in the garden where I spot gaps. I'll fill those with vegetables too. Here in bed number 14, there's chives and marjoram, a couple of different types of marjoram, some more of the monarda. Here, this beautiful fresh limey green. It's fennel, and it's actually bulb fennel, which has managed to survive the winter, which I'm really surprised about, but I'm very happy that it's growing there. Another ornamental with this beautiful dark purple leaf. Now I'm probably going to move this to the food forest this year, but for now it's there. And then down here I have a dwarf artichoke. It's a variety called dwarf and only gets to about 90 centimetres high. And in the corner there is a lemon variegated thyme. Bed number 15 is always a really exciting one. It's always got lots going on in it. So there is a dwarf sugar snapper mange 2p growing up the outside of the netting, and then where the netting comes down this side I've put 4 squashes. That's an uchiki kiri squash to scramble up the netting. That will mostly do its thing as the peas are going over, so they'll take up that space. Here we've got my rhubarb, which did really well at the beginning of the year and is now Well, it looks to me like it's struggling, and I don't know whether it's been too cold, too wet, too hot. It certainly won't have been too dry. So not sure why it's struggling, but it's not only me. I'm hearing from lots of people that their rhubarb is quite thin and struggling. I've actually fed the soil now in the hope that that will boost the roots for the rhubarb and that it'll do better. And then here there is another Asturian tree cabbage. And I have some spaces here which I'll be filling with beetroot and maybe some swede or rutabaga. And then this plant here is last year's parsnips. Now they were a complete failure in terms of giving me a crop, but I am letting them go to flower because great for pollinators. And here in bed number 16, I've got a huge lupin that I moved from over there earlier in the year. And in fact, all I did was put it down on the ground and thought, oh, I will plant that in the food forest. Well, it's managed to root itself into here. It's done so well, given that it hasn't actually been planted properly. And then this autumn, I will move it to its final position in the food forest. There's another row of rhubarb down there. That's a different varieties. The one here, it's all Timperley early, whereas those are Victoria and Sutton seedless. And I'm now growing on one called Champagne as well. There are mallows here. I don't use them for anything other than they look great and they attract pollinators. They're providing nectar for bees and other insects. There are some more ornamentals here, and also this lovely fern, and it's a shuttlecock fern. It's one of the very few ferns that have edible shoots, so no good now. It's just when the leaves first start coming up and you've got almost like a fiddlehead. I haven't tried them yet, so I don't know what they taste like. I was letting them establish. They seem to be doing pretty well, and in fact I know that they prefer a shady area, so I might be moving those to the very far end of the food forest where it's very damp and it's also very shady. That would give me a bit more space in here for growing food. And if you want to know what you can sow in the next month, well, I've made a video. And so I'll leave a link on the screen and also in the video description, and if you click on that link it'll take you directly through to that video.